Movies are supposed to be entertaining. They're not supposed to ruin lives, but these movies sparked controversies that made some of their creators regret the whole thing.
It's been said that you can't please everyone all of the time. That's especially true for movie endings. Hollywood history is full of shocking finales that have left people confused, made moviegoers mad, or sparked fierce debate between critics. From decades-old films to modern-day blockbusters, here are some of the most controversial movie endings of all time. Major spoilers ahead, obviously. Want a surefire way to stir up controversy? Make a movie about Jesus. It worked for Mel Gibson, Martin Scorsese, and of course Monty Python. Okay, technically Life of Brian isn't about Jesus at all. It's about a guy named Brian who gets mistaken for a messiah and ends up getting crucified. And while our reluctant hero dies a painful death, all the guys hanging on crosses around him launch into an upbeat musical number.
Always look on the bright side of life.
Needless to say, Life of Brian made some people pretty upset. Protesters sang hymns outside movie theaters, and the film was banned in some countries for decades. The Catholic Church jumped in and made up their own rating for Life of Brian, a C for condemned. Harsh. But despite the notoriety, or more likely because of it, Life of Brian has since become a comedy classic. Sure, Titanic is still the second highest grossing movie of all time, but those billions of dollars couldn't save the film from endless scrutiny. According to countless fans across the world, the ending of Titanic is nothing short of a disaster. After the boat goes down, Jack and Rose find themselves stuck in the freezing cold waters of the Atlantic. Then Jack freezes to death. It's this scene that sparked most of the outrage. Wasn't there room on that piece of wood for the both of them? The debate was so intense that in 2012, Mythbusters dedicated an entire episode to discovering the answer. With the help of director James Cameron, they determined that if Rose had just tied her life jacket to the underside of the door, there would have been enough buoyancy to hold them both. But Cameron doesn't buy into that argument, saying, "The script says Jack dies. He has to die. Maybe we screwed up. The board should have been a tiny bit smaller, but the dude's going down." In other words, true love is a lie and you should never hope for happiness. Jeez, Cameron. By this point, there are 7 different versions of Blade Runner available to watch, and thanks to all that tinkering, sci-fi fans have spent countless hours discussing whether or not Rick Deckard is actually a replicant. So, what's the correct answer? Well, if you go by the original ending, it's a straightforward no. The theatrical cut ends on an upbeat note, with Deckard and his robotic ladylove escaping into the mountains to live a long and happy life. However, that all changed with the director's cut. That's the version in which Scott added Deckard's unicorn dream and cut the happy Hollywood ending. This time around, the film ends with our protagonist finding Gaff's origami message, implying the cop knows what Deckard dreams about, because Deckard's memories are implants, thus making him a replicant. Ever since, people have argued about Deckard's true nature. Even Ridley Scott and Harrison Ford don't agree. The director firmly believes Deckard is a machine, while the actor fought to keep his character 100% human.
So I resisted the idea of being a replicant, I suppose, as a replicant would.
That settles it then. Or does it? The ending of The Mist is one of the bleakest finales ever put to film. Directed by Frank Darabont, The Mist focuses on a group of New Englanders trapped in a grocery store by a mysterious fog. The titular mist is full of horrifying monsters. But things aren't so great inside the store either. Once people start getting sacrificed, Thomas Jane's character, David Drayton, makes a break for freedom with a small band of survivors. But unfortunately, there's no happy ending here. Lost in the mist with no hope in sight, David performs a mercy killing to spare his friends and his own son from the oncoming creatures. And then, just a few painful seconds later, a group of army guys show up to save the day and look for survivors. Yeah, it's bleak, grim, and completely different from Stephen King's novella. But the author loved Darabont's twist, saying, "Frank wrote a new ending that I loved. It is the most shocking ending ever." Even though Alan Moore's Watchmen is widely considered the greatest graphic novel ever written, it took quite a while to get a movie adaptation up on the silver screen. At one point, Terry Gilliam took a crack at the material. But when that didn't pan out, it eventually fell to Zack Snyder to get the thing made. The result was a film that was pretty faithful to the book, except for one giant major change. In Moore's original story, the villainous Ozymandias destroys New York with a mocked-up alien squid. The arrival of the monster convinces the world's superpowers that extraterrestrials are going to attack, forcing the US and the USSR to put aside their differences and band together in order to face the otherworldly foe. However, Snyder totally dropped the whole alien sea beast angle. Instead, Ozymandias blows up New York and frames the omnipotent Dr. Manhattan, tricking America and the Soviet Union into becoming friends to defeat the naked blue superhero.
Millions of lives were suddenly ended in an act of evil perpetrated by Dr. Manhattan himself.
Snyder has since said that the squid was cut out so more time could be spent building the characters of Manhattan and Rorschach. For his part, he's also acknowledged that the altered ending was the biggest knock against the movie. So there's that. Christopher Nolan's Dark Knight trilogy was a game-changer for superhero movies, and as the final film in the series, The Dark Knight Rises had a lot to live up to. But instead of diving headfirst into the darkness, the third Nolan film ended on a much happier note, with the Caped Crusader saving Gotham from a nuclear bomb before giving up his vigilante ways to travel the world with Selina Kyle. As a result, many fans wondered if this was some sort of Inception-style dream sequence. After all, the scene plays out exactly like a fantasy described by Alfred earlier in the film.
I had this fantasy that I would look across the tables and I'd see you there.
Christian Bale, on the other hand, insists Batman's happy ending is completely real.
My personal opinion is, no, it was not a dream. That was for real.
Some people thought the movie should have gone in a more depressing direction by killing the superhero, while others were glad that Bruce Wayne finally got a happy ending. And really, we shouldn't have been surprised by the film's upbeat finale because, as Harvey Dent once explained it,
"The night is darkest just before the dawn."
This was the dawn audiences have been promised. Set in Alaska, The Grey follows a hunter named John Ottaway, played by Liam Neeson, who's stranded in the wilderness with a group of oil workers. While he starts the movie suicidal, Ottaway slowly regains the will to live, which is too bad since he winds up in the middle of a wolf den. Ready to fight, Ottaway tapes a knife and broken bottles to his hand. But before the final confrontation, the screen cuts to black. Movie over.
What?
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 Audiences were sharply divided. Some people thought the ending was perfect, while others felt cheated. As for director Joe Carnahan, he cut the wolf fighting finale because the film had already reached its emotional conclusion, and he also worried that the sight of CG canines might ruin the scene. However, Carnahan admits the promotional material was the enemy of the film in a lot of ways. I guess it created a promise that people felt the movie didn't live up to. Directed by Bong Joon-ho, Snowpiercer is set in the middle of a wintry post-apocalypse, with the last of humanity on a train that travels around the world. Unfortunately, living conditions aren't a picture of equality. Folks in the tail end are treated like prisoners, while the people in the front live like kings. So a group of rebels led by Curtis, played by Chris Evans, fights their way up to the front of the train, hoping to overthrow the head honchos. But when Curtis makes his way into the engine, he learns the train operates using child slave labor. Realizing the entire system is corrupt and impossible to save, Curtis destroys the train, possibly killing everyone on board, except for 2 kids. Emerging from the rubble, a teenage girl and a young boy find themselves Adam and Eve of a frozen world, and as they step into the snow, they see a polar bear, a sign the world is thawing out and maybe there's hope after all. Well, that's what Bong Joon-ho intended anyway, saying it's a very hopeful ending. Those 2 kids will spread the human race. But many people had trouble getting past certain plot issues. As plenty of critics have pointed out, those 2 kids have lived their entire lives on the train, so they'd have no hope of surviving the frigid wasteland. That is, if that big old bear didn't eat them, he's gotta be pretty hungry. On paper, Passengers should have been one of the biggest blockbusters of 2016. It starred Chris Pratt and Jennifer Lawrence, 2 of the biggest stars in the business, and it was based on a screenplay that many hailed as one of the best scripts in Hollywood. But the sci-fi flick was a flop, grossing $100 million domestically on a $110 million budget. So what went so terribly wrong about Passengers? Well, moviegoers were expecting to see a story about 2 beautiful people who accidentally wake up from suspended animation while traveling to a new planet. Unable to return to their pods, the 2 are fated to spend their lives together on the spaceship. But the trailers were more than slightly misleading. As it turns out, Chris Pratt's character Jim wakes up after his pod malfunctions. Unwilling to spend his life alone, he selfishly releases Jennifer Lawrence's character Aurora against her will. Even the robot bartender was surprised.
Who's the lovely lady?
This is Aurora.
Aurora.
Admittedly, the movie could have done something interesting with this premise, but instead of dealing with Jim's decision in a mature, complex way, The filmmakers have Aurora fall in love with the guy and decide to spend her life with him, even though he's essentially kidnapped and murdered her. When the rest of the passengers wake up nearly 90 years later, they find out that Jim and Aurora lived a long, happy life and grew a bunch of trees on their spaceship. As a result, critics hit the movie hard, and audiences decided to stay away from theaters.
When 10 Cloverfield Lane arrived in 2016, people wondered if this sci-fi flick would have any connection to the J.J. Abrams-produced monster movie Cloverfield that'd come out 8 years before. Was it a sequel or a prequel? Did it take place in the same universe? Would there be any aliens? As moviegoers quickly found out, there were most definitely aliens, but not everyone was happy when the evil ETs showed up on screen. The space worms first appear after our hero Michelle escapes from an underground bunker. For most of the movie, she's been held captive by Howard, a murderous conspiracy theorist who thinks aliens have taken over the world. And when Michelle finally makes her way to the surface, she discovers Howard was right. Seconds after defeating her warden, Michelle is forced to fight against invaders from another galaxy. This fiery finale ticked off quite a few moviegoers, as many thought the climax was overblown and out of place. Some said the movie self-destructed in the last few minutes, while others argued Michelle didn't need to fight any extraterrestrials as she'd already beaten Howard. On the other hand, other critics say the scene is essential for Michelle's character arc. Now that she's seen the alien foe up close, her decision to join the Resistance has real meaning. She now knows from first-hand experience what dangers lie ahead, so when she drives toward the invasion, we understand she's finally overcome her fear, and she won't run away this time. But regardless of your opinion on the ending, can we all agree that John Goodman was way scarier than any alien?
I'm sorry.
I accept your apology.
Directed by Nicholas Meyer, Star Trek II: The Wrath of Khan features one of the saddest death scenes you'll ever see in a sci-fi movie. After going toe-to-toe with Khan, the crew of the USS Enterprise is in serious trouble. There's a super weapon about to go off, and Captain Kirk can't escape the blast in time because the ship's warp drive has been seriously damaged. And that's when Spock decides to save the day. Putting the needs of the many ahead of the needs of the few, Spock exposes himself to deadly radiation in hopes of repairing the ship.
No human can tolerate the radiation that's in there.
As you are so fond of observing, Doctor, I am not human.
While his plan works out and the Enterprise escapes intact, our pointy-eared hero dies a tragic death, separated from Kirk by a pane of glass. It's a heartbreaking scene, and if you're not getting a bit misty-eyed right now, it's probably because you're a Vulcan.
How do you feel? How do you feel?
I do not understand the question.
Of course, fans back in 1982 weren't just upset about Spock's demise, they were downright furious. News of Spock's death leaked pretty early during the filming of Wrath of Khan, resulting in a major outcry from fans. According to executive director Harve Bennett, the filmmakers received 100,000 letters pleading for Spock's life. One Trekkie took out a magazine ad demanding that Paramount spare the Vulcan, and some fans were so upset that they started harassing actor Leonard Nimoy, actually threatening the man and his family. Hoping to throw fans off, Meyer and the company added a scene early in the film in which Spock fakes his death during a training sequence, and honestly, that probably only made it hurt even more when the Vulcan finally gave his trademark salute for the final time. Well, until Star Trek III: The Search for Spock came out anyway. When The Devil Inside hit theaters in 2012, there were multiple reports that audience members began jeering and shouting in anger after the credits started rolling. So what kind of ending would cause moviegoers to unleash their inner demons? Well, The Devil Inside is a found footage film about a killer named Maria who's possessed by 4 demons. Her daughter, Isabella, is making a documentary about her murderous mom, and eventually, the film culminates with an exorcism where the demons decide to leave their host and inhabit our heroes. As a result, things take an unfortunate turn as Isabella and her friend are speeding down a busy highway. Suddenly, her possessed buddy turns into oncoming traffic, and the movie cuts to black. And that's when a title card pops up, reading, "The facts surrounding the Rossi case remain unresolved. For more information about the ongoing investigation, visit www.therossifiles.com." Really? The site was just a bizarre bit of viral marketing, but moviegoers thought that they would have to visit the site to find out how the story ended. That wasn't actually the case, but nevertheless, people felt cheated, prompting a whole lot of outrage from furious horror fans. Based on the novel by Nicholas Sparks, Safe Haven has a terrible approval rating on Rotten Tomatoes, and a lot of that hatred has to do with an ending that comes straight out of The Sixth Sense. Supposedly set in the real world, a place where ghosts don't exist, this 2013 romance focuses on a battered wife named Katie. She's on the run after stabbing her husband, and she eventually winds up in a new town where she befriends a local woman named Jo and falls in love with a hunky widower named Alex. As you've probably guessed, Katie and Alex wind up together, but moments before the credits roll, the couple discovers a stack of letters written by Alex's dead wife, Carly. They also find a photo of his old flame, and surprise, she looks exactly like Jo. Yeah, that's right. Katie's friend Jo is the ghost of Alex's wife, returned from the afterlife to play matchmaker for her hubby. As twists go, this one is completely nuts, especially considering there weren't any apparent supernatural elements in the movie until the end. In fact, the finale was so bonkers that one critic wrote that the twist will make you want to punch the movie in the face. Directed by Seth Rogen and Evan Goldberg, The Interview follows a talk show host and his producer as they visit North Korea to, interview Kim Jong-un. But before they reach Asia, they're recruited by the CIA to assassinate the dictator. Initially reluctant, they finally do the deed when Kim decides to launch his nuclear weapons. As Kim sits in a helicopter, James Franco and Seth Rogen blast him to Kingdom Come with a tank, and we watch in slow-mo as the bad guy's face catches on fire. Originally, Kim's death was way more violent. His entire head exploded, sending chunks of skull everywhere. This did not set well with the CEO of Sony, who insisted that Rogen tone down the gore. But that was just the start of what would become an international incident. The madness really began when North Korea stated that releasing The Interview would be an act of war. Things only got worse when a North Korean-backed group called the Guardians of Peace hacked Sony, began releasing private emails, and demanded the studio shut down the controversial comedy. And this is when things got kind of scary. The Guardians of Peace followed up their hacking attack with terrorist threats. As a result, 5 major theater chains decided to drop The Interview, and Sony initially declined to release the movie online. Sure, the movie eventually did make its way into theaters and streaming services, but it's kind of weird to think that decades from now, film students will still be talking about how a ridiculous Seth Rogen movie sparked an international incident.
They hate us because they ain't us. Kim! Oh, got it, boy! Okay. Alley-oop! Oh!
Even though Do the Right Thing came out nearly 30 years ago, it's just as relevant today as it was in 1989. Set during a vicious summer heat wave in New York City, this Spike Lee joint focuses on a small neighborhood divided by race. The film takes place over the course of a single day, and we watch as an argument between a pizza shop owner and 2 customers escalates into a violent showdown. The madness starts when an NYPD officer kills a young African-American man. In response, the main character starts a riot that destroys the aforementioned pizza parlor. It's a devastating climax, one that leaves audiences shaken to the core, but empathetic toward all the characters and where they're coming from. Well, that was what was supposed to happen anyway. Unfortunately, a lot of people misunderstood the movie and worried Do the Right Thing would incite real-life riots. One reviewer at the time wrote, "The end of this movie is a shambles, and if some audiences go wild, Lee is partly responsible." Other critics apparently felt the same way, with one going so far as to say the movie could have political ramifications. Naturally, this didn't set well with Lee, who told Rolling Stone, "I don't remember people saying people were going to come out of theaters killing people after they watched Arnold Schwarzenegger films."
A character's outfit helps define who the character is in the context of the film, particularly when it comes to period pieces and superhero movies. Seemingly tiny incorrect details can cause a huge uproar among fans. From metal bikinis to sparkly hot pants, let's take a look at some of the most controversial movie costumes and the explanations behind them. Joel Schumacher's Batman and Robin was a disaster, to put it mildly. Setting aside the cartoony elements, the terrible dialogue, and poor plot choices, fans will never forget the costumes, specifically the bat nipples.
You can milk anything with nipples.
Schumacher explained his reasoning in a Batman special. The bodies for the suits, the inspiration for them, are Greek statues that have perfect bodies. And so we're molding this perfect body in rubber, and they're anatomically erotic. So it never occurred to me to not put nipples on the men's suits because I didn't know the male nipple was a controversial body part. Oscar-winning costume designer Nyla Dixon came up with the unique idea that Green Lantern's costume should be a manifestation of his power. That could have led to some pretty cool visuals, but as fans immediately realized when the first images of Green Lantern were released, the special effects just weren't up to the job.
Ah, green! Wow. I know, right?
Even star Ryan Reynolds also complained how the costume made his job much harder to do, saying, "It's brutal doing a film where you're wearing a motion capture suit for the whole time. I didn't even get to see the Green Lantern suit until the first trailer. I never even knew what it looked like." Harley Quinn's big screen debut in David Ayer's Suicide Squad was one of the movie's biggest draws, especially since Margot Robbie was playing the famed villain. As with any other comic book character, a lot of media attention focused on her costume, particularly how much of it was missing. When asked about her body-hugging costume, Robbie told the New York Times that Harley was, quote, wearing hot pants because they're sparkly and fun, but the actress personally felt self-conscious about the outfit. Ayer defended the look by saying that he didn't think denim overalls would be appropriate for that character, because that clearly was the only other possible choice. You may have blocked it from your memory, but Ryan Reynolds played Deadpool before Deadpool. Unfortunately, during his first outing as the character in X-Men Origins Wolverine, the filmmakers decided to make the brave, bold choice of doing everything they could to insult the character's fans. They took away his comic book outfit, including his iconic mask, and they sewed his mouth shut, leaving a character who's literally referred to as the Merc with a mouth, physically unable to speak. Studio ADI, who applied the creature effects for the film, made a video explaining their whole side of the Deadpool tale. The artist believed the studio didn't intend for Deadpool to be fully formed in Wolverine, just a setup for what he could become in a later film.
This is sort of a pre-Deadpool. If you think of this as the embryonic Deadpool, then it might make more sense.
Though audiences generally love the big dino action, there was one big problem with Jurassic World for some fans: Bryce Dallas Howard's heels, which somehow stay magically glued to her feet even when running from a T-Rex through mud, rain, and wet concrete. But Howard defended the choice, telling Yahoo News, "I'm better equipped to run when I have shoes on my feet, so that's my perspective on it. I don't think she would carry around flats with her. I think she's somebody who could sprint a marathon in heels. For me, it was actually logical for her to be in that very illogical situation, because she doesn't belong in the jungle and yet she finds herself there and has to adapt." In the comics, Judge Dredd famously never reveals his true face, a decision that's symbolic of his dedication to his job. There is no other secret identity. His helmet isn't a mask, it's who he is. So it was a huge problem for fans when star Sylvester Stallone took his helmet off less than 20 minutes into the film. The reason was simple: Stallone's celebrity was more important than the source material, and he wanted to showcase that famous face. After all, what's the point in signing a superstar to a role when you never get to even see him? As Judge Dredd writer Alan Grant said, the story was subservient to Stallone, who I think takes himself too seriously. Or, in other words, Princess Leia's metal bikini struck an immediate chord with adolescent male fans of the Star Wars series from the moment it debuted in Return of the Jedi. But while the outfit was based on Frank Frazetta's legendary painting The Princess of Mars, plenty of critics have since found the slave Leia costume to be a prime example of sexual objectification, a sexist treatment of the series' only notable female character at the time. Carrie Fisher, who played Leia and had to put up with decades of discussion around the outfit, warned Daisy Ridley, star of The Force Awakens, "Don't be a slave like I was. You keep fighting against that slave outfit." Fisher later tweeted, "That chain only enslaved me until I could use the Frabjous thing to kill that drooling, swollen, super-tongued slug and whirl him off into infinity." As always, Fisher had the last and best word.
Few films have earned the dreaded NC-17 rating, but how far is too far? For these films, the line between artistry and exploitation is a thin one. Spoilers ahead. Blonde tells the story of Marilyn Monroe, and it doesn't shy away from the darker parts of her life. There's plenty of nudity throughout the movie, but the scene that likely tipped it into NC-17 territory is one that depicts President John F. Kennedy sexually assaulting Monroe.
Baby, don't be shy. Come on, come on.
That particular scene created extra controversy, as it's one of the moments in the film that isn't based in fact. Several outlets reported on this, with Glamour summing it up, saying, "There are no claims or records of JFK sexually assaulting Marilyn." The response to Blonde was heavily divided, with some calling the film exploitative and criticizing the moments, like the shocking JFK scene, in which the film took creative liberties. Director Andrew Dominic said he knew his film would strike a nerve with some viewers, but he was genuinely shocked that it ended up getting slapped with an NC-17 rating, telling Vulture, "I was surprised. I thought we'd colored inside the lines." While Killer Joe might be best remembered for its shocking bursts of violence and brutality, the film also contains two shocking sex scenes. The first involves Dottie, played by Juno Temple, who strips down for a full frontal nude scene early on. But the second is far more disturbing, despite both characters being fully clothed. This is because Joe, played by Matthew McConaughey, humiliates Gina Gershon's character by forcing her to fillet a chicken bone while he grunts and moans with satisfaction. It might be one of the most disturbing sexual acts ever put on the screen, and it's easy to see why it helped land the movie an NC-17 rating. The topic of sex addiction is inherently rife with explicit material, so it's no surprise to find the 2011 drama Shame on this list. The film focuses on Michael Fassbender's character, Brandon, a man constantly seeking casual sex. One of the film's early NC-17-worthy moments is a montage of Brandon's hookups, clip after clip of him walking out of his bedroom following a fresh sexual encounter, passing the camera fully nude with nothing to block his genitals from sight. But that's not all of it. There's also sex in a back alley, a threesome with sex workers, and a same-sex encounter with another man at a gay bar. Still, the most disturbing element of the film might be Brandon's borderline incestuous relationship with his sister.
She feels very deeply that she and her brother should be closer, and I think that's what she wants.
Shame implies that the reason the siblings have such a complicated sexual history is because they were molested together as children. While Shame comes pretty close to incestuous content, 2003's The Dreamers basically dives headfirst into the subject. In the film, Matthew goes to Paris as an exchange student, where he meets and befriends twin siblings Isabelle and Theo.
We thought you might like to move your things here. But you barely even know me. This is where we get to know you.
However, when he's invited to stay with them, he discovers that the twins really do share everything. He sees them sleeping nude together and engages in sexual games with them. It's a passionate love triangle in which all three pursue each other relentlessly. The film contains explicit sexual scenes, including full frontal nudity from all three of its main actors, and a sampler of all sorts of sexual acts. Paul Verhoeven's much-maligned erotic drama Showgirls tells the story of Nomi Malone, who comes to Las Vegas with dreams of becoming a famous dancer. She starts working in a strip club and soon strikes up a rivalry with local diva Crystal Connors and a relationship with Crystal's boyfriend, Zach. As you might expect, Showgirls contains many scenes only suitable for adults, but one scene in particular pushed the movie well into NC-17 territory. Despite being the only genuinely decent person in the film, the character of Molly endures a horrific sexual assault in the film's most controversial scene. Actor Gina Rivera avoided talking about the scene and the film in general for many years, but she finally opened up about the experience during a 2020 interview with Yahoo Entertainment, saying, "When you do a scene like that, your body doesn't know it's not real. I don't know if I would have taken the movie if I had understood that." Every director reacts to an NC-17 rating differently. Some don't care in the slightest, and others lobby for the Motion Picture Association to reconsider its decision. Ira Sachs didn't hold back when his 2023 film Passages got slapped with an NC-17, telling the Los Angeles Times, "We hunger for movies that are in any proximity to our own experience, and to find a movie like this, which is then shut out, is to me depressing and reactionary, particularly in a culture which is already battling in such extreme ways the possibility of LGBT imagery to exist." The movie's distributor managed to technically avoid the NC-17 rating by releasing Passages unrated, but that still affected the movie's reach. In Passages, a man upends his relationship with his husband after starting an affair with a woman.
If my party and my husband doesn't want to dance with me, I'll dance with you.
The film carefully analyzes the relationships between its protagonists, but because that means seeing them at their most intimate, things get pretty explicit. There are a handful of sex scenes throughout the movie, but a long continuous take scene showing two characters having sex in a movie editing booth is what most likely tipped Passages toward an NC-17 rating. Written and directed by Pedro Almodovar, 2004's Bad Education is a heartbreaking story about navigating the intricacies of sexual identity. The movie follows Spanish film director Enrique Godet, who reconnects with his first love, Ignacio Rodriguez, and Ignacio, now called Angel, suggests he uses a short story called The Visit as the basis for a new project. Working through the story, Enrique relives parts of his childhood when he fell in love with Ignacio at a Catholic boarding school, and the two of them were eventually torn apart and abused by the school's principal, Father Manolo. If you were to watch Bad Education without knowing its rating, you'd probably be surprised to learn that the movie is NC-17. That's because compared to most of the movies on this list, Bad Education isn't that graphic. The moment that gave the film its rating is a 2-second clip depicting oral sex. You don't actually see genitalia on screen, but a head bobbing up and down was enough for the Motion Picture Association. According to publicist Jessica Uzon, the filmmakers pushed back against the decision. The MPA stood firm, but producers refused to remove the scene. As Uzon told the New York Times, it's a film for adults. It's not very surprising that a movie called Zack and Miri Make a Porno initially got rated NC-17. The film stars Seth Rogen and Elizabeth Banks as best friends and roommates who are short on cash and desperate for any way to pay their bills. They decide that with the help of a few friends and strangers, they'll break into the pornography business to turn their lives around.
Porn I liked when I was a kid, it was always like a spoof of a popular movie, you know, like Edward Penis Hands.
Naturally, Zack and Miri has a handful of sex scenes, though most of them are a good deal tamer than those in other movies that made this list. According to director Kevin Smith, the MPA took issue with 2 scenes in particular. In an interview with Vulture, Smith explained, the initial NC-17 rating for Zack and Miri Make a Porno was predicated on the thrusting in one scene and the shot. Smith was referring to a moment in which one of Zack's friends gets covered in feces while filming an adult scene, insisting, I made sure everything kind of worked within the boundaries, and the MPA were like, this movie will never get an R as long as that scene is in the movie. You got to cut out the shot altogether. Smith argued that the comic nature of the sex scenes meant his film should be rated R. He took his case to an appeal and, to his surprise, he won. No matter how many films you've seen, Blue is the Warmest Color is likely to be one of the most intensely sexual films you'll ever watch. The movie follows the passionate love affair that explodes between Emma and Adele, and is filled with graphic sex scenes, to the point that the film has been the subject of some controversy. The centerpiece of Blue is the Warmest Color is a 7-minute sex scene between Adele and Emma that features all manner of different sexual acts and positions, and it was these scenes that drew some ire for the mostly well-received film. For example, Jay Hoberman of Art Info wrote, the most discomfiting thing about Blue is that it ultimately feels like a menage a trois involving the actors and the camera, staged for the benefit of the director. Elsewhere, there is a highly explicit scene of Adele pleasuring herself, a heterosexual encounter with full frontal nudity, and several other highly sexual scenes. 1990's Henry and June sparked controversy when it became the first NC-17 movie after the X rating was sidelined. Written and directed by Philip Kaufman, the movie is part biopic and part historical fiction. It tells the story of American writer Henry Miller and his wife June moving to Paris in the 1930s. There, they meet Anaïs Nin, and the three of them strike up a steamy affair. Sex scenes are front and center throughout the movie, and that was enough for it to inaugurate the new rating. The real-life Miller was well known for including all sorts of tales of debauchery in his novels and short stories. His 1934 novel Tropic of Cancer was based on the experiences he had in Paris, and the book actually changed obscenity laws in the United States. After the novel was banned in Florida, the Supreme Court ended up ruling in the book's favor and opened the door to a new wave of steamy literature in the mainstream. We know what you're thinking. A film called Nymphomaniac is obviously going to be rated NC-17. However, that wasn't the plan from the beginning. Originally, Lars von Trier's lengthy tale about a self-diagnosed sex addict was meant to have 2 different versions. One is what exists today, and the other would have been an edited-down version that would be more in line with a typical R-rated movie. But von Trier struggled to edit the film, and in the end, the studio decided to back his true vision for the movie.
It's all so exotic. So broad-minded.
Nymphomaniac explores the life story of 50-year-old Joe, played by Charlotte Gainsbourg, who's discovered beaten up in an alley by a man named Seligman. He brings her home to take care of her injuries, and she starts to tell him about her many wild sexual experiences. A plethora of sex scenes and extreme close-up shots of every imaginable body part guaranteed the film's rating. While some viewers may have been turned away by the graphic nature of the film, even more were probably put off by the full movie's 4-hour runtime. It was later released in 2 parts with no MPA rating. Few films are as emotionally difficult to watch as Requiem for a Dream. This intense psychological drama from Darren Aronofsky follows 4 characters who go from being users of their respective substances to becoming desperately addicted.
Purple in the morning, blue in the afternoon, orange in the evening.
Its NC-17 rating comes from the lengths that the quartet goes to in hopes of getting their fix. Perhaps the most explicit moments feature Marion, who becomes a sex worker to obtain more heroin. Her story culminates with a series of lesbian sex acts as a group of businessmen jeer and holler at the participants with excitement. Elsewhere, there's a brutal scene of shock therapy, and another character has his arm amputated due to an intravenous infection that turns gangrenous. Absolutely no one gets a happy ending, and in the final sequence, all four curl themselves into the fetal position in hopes of escaping their horrific traumas. While Requiem for a Dream may be the least sexual of the films on this list, it might also be the best and is worth watching for anyone who can handle such extreme subject matter.